The man they would not let past the front desk would be the only one in the building who understood what was wrong with the car behind the glass. At 9:12 on a bright Thursday morning in Westchester County, Caleb Morrison walked into Hartwell Premier Motors holding a thin blue folder in one hand and his daughter Lucy's small fingers in the other. The dealership looked too clean for the kind of work it claimed to sell. White marble floors stretched under rows of luxury SUVs and coupes polished until the ceiling lights moved across their hoods like water. A black reception desk sat beneath a wall of framed awards. Salesmen in fitted navy suits moved quietly between customers, smiling with the careful ease of people trained to make expensive things feel inevitable. Caleb wore a charcoal work jacket that had been washed too many times, dark jeans, and brown boots with garage dust still caught along the seams. He had tried to clean them before leaving the apartment, but some dust did not come off when a man had spent years earning it. Lucy walked beside him in a yellow cardigan and sneakers, clutching a little red toy wrench her mother had once kept on her service desk as a joke. It was plastic, chipped at the handle, and too small to fix anything except a child's courage. Caleb stopped at the reception desk and gave his name to the woman behind it. "I have an interview for the service technician opening," he said. His voice was low and even. Lucy looked up at the cars, then at the glass wall separating the showroom from the service bay, where mechanics in gray uniforms moved around a covered SUV under white shop lights. Before the receptionist could answer, Grant Pritchard came out from an office near the finance desk with Caleb's application already in his hand. Grant was the general manager, polished from his tie clip to his shoes, with the expression of a man who believed judgment was more efficient than conversation. He looked at Caleb's jacket first. Then the boots. Then the folder. He did not look at Lucy until she stepped closer to her father's leg. "Mr. Morrison," Grant said, loud enough for two salesmen and a couple near a silver coupe to hear. "I reviewed your file." Caleb nodded once. "I appreciate the opportunity." Grant placed the folder flat on the reception counter, not handing it back, just setting it down like something that had failed to earn the weight of his fingers. "There is not going to be an interview." Lucy's hand tightened around Caleb's. Caleb did not move. "May I ask why?" Grant gave a small professional smile that made the words colder. "We need current dealership experience, factory recertification within the last year, and candidates who understand the level of client this location serves." He glanced at Caleb's boots again. "This is not a roadside garage." One of the salesmen looked away. The couple near the silver coupe pretended not to listen. Caleb felt Lucy looking up at him, waiting to see whether the words had hurt him, and because of that he made sure his face did not change. "My background is in diagnostics," he said. Grant's smile did not move. "Your background has gaps." Caleb knew that. Those gaps had names. Hannah's hospital room. Lucy's school pickup. Rent paid 3 days late. Nights when he fixed neighbors' cars in a freezing driveway because grief did not pause the bills. But he did not explain any of that to Grant Pritchard. Some people treated explanations like spare parts they had no intention of using. Grant slid the folder a few inches toward him. "We are not in a position to take chances on charity cases." The sentence landed on the marble floor and stayed there. Lucy looked down at her toy wrench. Caleb picked up the folder with steady hands. He did not raise his voice. He did not ask for sympathy. He only looked once through the glass wall toward the service bay, where the covered SUV's dashboard suddenly flickered with amber warning lights. A technician leaned into the driver's seat and frowned. Caleb heard the engine idle change, just barely, a soft uneven tremor under the polished silence of the showroom. Then Grant turned away as if the matter was finished. Caleb held Lucy's hand and said quietly, "Come on, honey." But he did not take his eyes off the glass. Caleb Morrison walked Lucy toward the small waiting area near the vending machine because a father sometimes needed 6 feet of distance before he could teach his child what not to become. The showroom stayed bright behind them, white marble, chrome trim, soft leather chairs, and salesmen speaking in quiet voices beside vehicles that cost more than Caleb had earned in the last 2 years. Grant Pritchard had already turned back toward his office with Caleb's folder under one arm, finished with him before the interview chair had ever been pulled out. Lucy did not look at Grant. She looked at her father's face. That was worse. Children did not always understand words like factory recertification or dealership experience, but they understood when adults made a room feel smaller around someone they loved. Caleb crouched near the vending machine and set the blue folder on the chair beside him. The marble floor was so polished he could see the dull shape of his boots reflected beneath him. One of Lucy's shoelaces had come loose, dragging a small gray line through the shine. He took the lace in both hands and tied it carefully, double-knotting it the way Hannah used to remind him before kindergarten drop-off. Lucy held the red toy wrench against her chest. "Dad," she asked quietly, "did they not like us?" Caleb kept his eyes on the knot for one extra second because the right answer had to be clean enough for a 7-year-old and honest enough for the man saying it. "They did not read far enough," he said. Lucy looked toward the reception counter where Grant had placed the folder down like something already decided. "But you brought your papers." "I did. And you wore your good jacket." Caleb looked at the jacket sleeve, worn pale near the cuff, the seam repaired with black thread because replacing it had never made sense when winter bills were waiting. "I did." Lucy seemed to think about that, then lowered the toy wrench. It slipped from her fingers and touched the marble with a small plastic click that sounded much louder than it should have in a place full of expensive silence. Caleb picked it up before she could apologize and placed it gently back in her hand. Hannah had kept that little wrench on her service desk at Eastbrook Auto because customers smiled when they saw it beside her computer. She had been the scheduler who could calm an angry driver, find an open service slot where none existed, and remember which mechanic liked black coffee and which one needed 2 sugars after a rough morning. When she got sick, Caleb stopped taking late diagnostic contracts first. Then he stopped traveling. Then he stopped pretending life would return to the calendar they had planned. After she passed, the garage dust on his boots came from whatever work fit between school pickup, doctor forms, rent, and nights when Lucy woke asking if heaven had telephones. Hartwell Premier Motors had looked like a way back into steady work. Health insurance. Day shifts. A service bay with heat in the winter. A place where skill might matter more than the gaps grief had carved into his resume. Caleb stood and smoothed Lucy's hair once. "We are going to go," he said. "Are you sad?" she asked. He looked through the glass wall toward the service bay. The covered Hartwell Apex X9 sat under white shop lights with its hood closed, its dashboard pulsing amber again. A technician cleared the warning code from a laptop. The light disappeared. 2 seconds later, it came back. The engine idle gave that same uneven tremor, soft but wrong, like a loose wire trying to speak through metal. Caleb's face did not change, but his eyes sharpened. "Not yet," he said. The Hartwell Apex X9 did not fail loudly. That was what made the problem expensive. Loud failures gave people something to point at. This one hid behind polished paint, soft leather, and a dashboard that kept pretending to recover before it embarrassed everyone again. Behind the glass wall, 3 technicians stood around the $180,000 demo vehicle with scan tools, laptops, and the tense silence of men who had already tried the obvious answers. The Apex X9 sat beneath white service bay lights with its hood closed and its front wheels perfectly straight, a deep midnight blue machine built to look effortless for the afternoon presentation. A private group of clients was scheduled to arrive before noon. Vivian Hartwell herself was expected before 10. Grant Pritchard had told the sales team that this vehicle would make the dealership look untouchable. Now the warning lights kept coming back. From the waiting area near the vending machine, Caleb watched through the glass without moving closer. Lucy stood beside him with the red toy wrench in both hands, quiet because she could feel that her father was listening to something no one else in the showroom could hear. In the service bay, Owen Hayes, the youngest technician, sat in the driver's seat with a tablet balanced against the steering wheel. He cleared the code. The amber lights vanished. The engine settled for one breath. Then the driver assist warning returned, followed by a stability message, then a battery management alert that made one of the older technicians rub both hands over his face. "Run the update again," Grant said from the bay entrance. His voice had lost the smooth showroom finish it carried at the reception desk. "We did," the technician answered. "Twice." "Then run it a third time." Caleb looked at the vehicle, not the tablet. Software errors had a rhythm. So did electrical problems. The idle had a small uneven pull beneath it, barely more than a tremor, appearing each time the system tried to sync the driver assist module. The lights were not random. They were arriving in sequence, like a row of people giving the same wrong address from different streets. Owen leaned out of the driver's seat. "The update package is clean." Grant stepped closer to him. "The chief executive officer is walking in here in less than 30 minutes with clients behind her." Clean is not a solution. A salesman passed through the showroom carrying bottled water for guests who had not yet arrived. Two customers near a silver coupe glanced toward the glass wall, sensing trouble without knowing what kind. Grant saw them looking and forced a smile, then turned his back to the showroom as if posture could repair a vehicle. Caleb noticed a faint flicker along the lower dash when the system reset again. Not the screen. Not the code. The light itself. A grounding path that dipped under load. He had seen that kind of behavior before in prototype harness routing, especially when a connector sat too tight behind a panel and turned every vibration into a bad conversation. Lucy touched his sleeve. "Dad, are we still leaving?" Caleb looked at her toy wrench, then through the glass at the technicians clearing the same codes again. The lights disappeared. 2 seconds later, they returned. This time even Grant did not speak right away. Caleb picked up his blue folder from the chair. "In a minute," he said. "That car is not done talking." Caleb did not step toward the service bay because he wanted to be noticed. He stepped toward it because the sound had changed again. The glass wall between the showroom and the technicians softened most of the engine noise, but it did not erase the rhythm. A clean idle had a kind of balance to it, even through glass, even under bright showroom music and quiet sales voices. The Apex X9 did not have that balance. It carried a small uneven drop every few seconds, just as the dashboard warnings returned in sequence. Driver assist first. Stability next. Battery management last. Not random. Never random. Caleb stopped 3 feet from the glass with Lucy beside him, still holding the red toy wrench in both hands. The service bay lights reflected across the showroom floor and turned the marble into a white mirror. In that reflection, Caleb could see the vehicle's dashboard at an angle, the amber lights blinking in a pattern the technicians kept treating like separate problems. He was not looking at the screen the way they were. He was listening to the space between the lights. Grant stood near the driver door, one hand on his hip, forcing his voice lower because the showroom customers were pretending not to watch. "Clear it again," he said. Owen Hayes, still in the driver's seat, looked tired enough to stop pretending this was normal. "It comes back under module sync. Then it is a software issue." Caleb said it before he meant to say it. "That is not a software issue." The words were quiet, but the glass and marble carried them farther than he expected. Lucy looked up at him. Owen turned his head through the open driver door. Grant turned slower. Caleb kept his eyes on the vehicle. "It is losing ground path under load." For a moment, no one moved. The older technician near the front wheel gave a short breath through his nose, not quite a laugh, not quite a question. Grant walked toward the glass door and pushed it open with more force than necessary. The sharp smell of clean rubber, polish, and warm electronics drifted into the showroom. "You are still here?" he asked. Caleb placed one hand lightly on Lucy's shoulder, not to hide behind her, but to remind himself what kind of man she needed to see. I was leaving. Grant looked past him at the waiting area, the vending machine, the folder under Caleb's arm. Then leave. Owen stepped out of the SUV before he seemed sure he should. He was young, nervous, and more honest than comfortable. What did you say about ground path? Grant snapped his name like a warning. Owen. But Owen was watching Caleb now, not Grant. Caleb looked through the open bay door at the lower dashboard panel, then at the warning lights, then at the slight tremor in the idle when the driver assist module tried to sync. The harness behind the dash is pinched or routed too tight near a bracket, he said. The connector holds until load changes. Then the ground signal drops just enough to make 3 modules blame each other. One technician looked at the scan tool. Another looked at the vehicle. Grant smiled, but the smile was thinner than before. That is a very confident guess for a man who was just told he was not qualified to interview. Caleb did not answer that. He did not tell Grant about the prototype diagnostic teams. He did not mention the internal bulletins, the late-night test bays, or the years when men with factory badges called him because the computer had already lied twice. He only looked once at Lucy, whose toy wrench had lowered in her hands. It is not a guess, he said. The amber lights blinked again behind Grant's shoulder. Owen stared at the pattern. The service bay became very quiet. Then, from somewhere beyond the rear entrance, a set of heels crossed the concrete with calm, measured steps, and every employee who heard them straightened before they even saw who was coming. The footsteps stopped just beyond the service entrance, but Grant Pritchard was too busy protecting his pride to understand why the room had changed. Every technician had straightened, yet Grant kept his eyes on Caleb as if the real problem in the dealership was not the $180,000 demo vehicle blinking warnings behind him, but the man with garage dust on his boots who had noticed too much. Owen Hayes stood beside the open driver door, scan tool still in his hand, looking from the dashboard to Caleb with the uneasy expression of someone young enough to still care whether the truth came from the right uniform. Lucy stayed near the glass wall, half in the showroom and half in the service bay light, clutching her red toy wrench so tightly her fingers turned pale around the plastic handle. Caleb felt her watching him. That was why he kept his voice quiet. I can verify it without removing anything major, he said. 5 minutes. Non-invasive diagnostic. Multimeter at the ground point, scan tool on module sync, visual check behind the lower dash panel. Grant gave a short laugh, polished and mean. You are not touching that vehicle. I said verify, Caleb said. Not repair. You were not hired to verify anything. Grant stepped closer, lowering his voice only enough to pretend he was being professional. You came in here with an old folder, no current certification, a resume full of gaps, and a child in the waiting area. Now you think guessing the word ground is going to get you into my service bay? The older technicians looked away. Owen did not. Caleb did not look at them for help. He had learned long ago that rooms built on status rarely handed mercy to the person standing lowest in them. If I am wrong, Caleb said, I will walk out before your coffee cools. Grant's mouth tightened. You already walked out. You just forgot to keep going. The words reached Lucy through the open glass door. Caleb saw her toy wrench lower a little. Something in him wanted to answer then, not for himself, but for the small child learning how adults measured her father. He placed one hand on her shoulder again and felt the thin bone beneath the yellow cardigan, the trust in how she leaned into him without knowing she had done it. He thought of Hannah behind the service desk years ago, telling him that a customer could be rude, a manager could be blind, but a child should never have to watch you become what hurt you. So Caleb swallowed the answer and looked back at the Apex X9. The warning lights returned in the same order. Driver assist. Stability. Battery management. The idle dipped once, recovered, then dipped again. Owen stepped closer to the dashboard. He is describing the sequence. Grant turned on him. Do you want your name on the failure report when a rejected applicant damages the chief executive officer's demo vehicle? Owen froze. Caleb lifted both hands slightly, palms open, away from the vehicle. No one needs to risk anything. Let him test the ground voltage with the car running. If it holds steady, I am wrong. Grant pointed toward the showroom. Take your daughter and leave. The service bay went still enough that the soft hum of the overhead lights became clear. Caleb nodded once. Not agreement. Not defeat. Just the kind of nod a man gives when he has heard the wall and knows arguing with brick only bruises the hand. He picked up his blue folder from the small service counter and guided Lucy back toward the showroom side of the glass. Behind him, the Apex X9 flickered again. Then a calm female voice came from the service entrance. Why is my demo vehicle still throwing warnings, and why is the man describing the fault being sent out? Grant's face changed before he turned around. Vivian Hartwell stood just inside the service bay in a dark executive blazer, rain still shining faintly on her sleeves, her eyes moving from Grant to the vehicle, then to Caleb's hand resting protectively on Lucy's shoulder. No one in the service bay laughed now. Vivian Hartwell did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The service bay belonged to her in a way Grant Pritchard had only borrowed, and every person in gray uniform understood that before she took a second step across the concrete floor. She looked first at the Apex X9, still idling beneath the white lights with its amber warnings returning in the same patient sequence. Then she looked at Owen Hayes, whose scan tool hung in one hand like a question he was afraid to ask. Then at Grant, whose polished confidence had begun to separate at the edges. Only after that did she look at Caleb Morrison and the little girl standing half behind his leg with a red toy wrench pressed to her chest. Start from the beginning, Vivian said. Grant recovered enough to smile. There is no issue with staff, Ms. Hartwell. This gentleman was an applicant for the service opening. I reviewed his file and determined he was not a fit. He overheard a diagnostic discussion and began offering opinions from the showroom. Vivian kept her eyes on Caleb. Was he asked to leave? Yes. And before or after he identified the fault sequence? Grant hesitated. It was small, but in a quiet service bay, small things carried. He did not identify anything. He guessed. The Apex X9 chose that moment to flicker again. Driver assist. Stability. Battery management. The idle dipped under the last warning, then corrected itself. Vivian turned slightly toward the vehicle. Mr. Morrison, she said, reading the name from the blue folder under his arm, what do you think is happening? Caleb felt Lucy shift beside him. He could have made the moment bigger. He could have looked at Grant. He could have let bitterness sharpen the answer. Instead, he looked only at the SUV. The driver assist module is not failing, he said. It is losing a clean ground when the sync load changes. The stability system sees the drop first, the battery management module catches the voltage fluctuation last, and the scan tool reports 3 problems because the shared reference is unstable. Vivian's expression did not soften. If anything, it became more precise. Which ground path? Grant gave a quiet breath, as if the question itself was unnecessary. Caleb answered without pause. Left side instrument panel harness, lower bracket behind the knee bolster, shared ground return near the driver assist control unit. If the harness was routed tight after the pre-demo accessory install, the connector can hold during key on and fail under module sync vibration. Owen looked down at the scan tool, then back at the lower dash. One of the older technicians stopped. Pretending not to listen. Vivian took one step closer to Caleb. And how would you verify it without disturbing the vehicle before the client presentation? Back probe ground voltage at the shared return while Owen runs the sync test. Check for drop under load. Then inspect the harness route behind the lower panel with a flashlight before touching anything else. The answer was not dramatic. That was what made it difficult to dismiss. Vivian turned to Grant. Why was he refused before the interview? Grant straightened. His certifications are not current, and the resume has gaps. Caleb looked down once at Lucy, then back at the vehicle. Those gaps are mine, he said quietly. They do not belong to the car. Vivian heard that, and for the first time since she entered, her eyes moved to Lucy's toy wrench, then to Caleb's hand resting lightly on his daughter's shoulder. She did not ask about it. Not yet. She looked at Owen. Run the test exactly as he described. Grant stepped forward. Ms. Hartwell, with respect, this is your demo vehicle. Vivian did not look at him. That is why I want the person who understands the fault to stop being interrupted. The service bay went silent in a different way. Caleb handed Lucy his folder and guided her to the safe side of the glass wall near the showroom. Stay where I can see you, he said. Lucy nodded, holding the folder with one arm and the toy wrench with the other. Caleb walked toward the Apex X9, stopping beside Owen rather than taking the tool from his hand. He did not act like a man being rescued. He acted like a man returning to work. Vivian watched him point to the lower dashboard panel, calm and exact, and something old in her memory shifted. The route code he had named was not in the public service manual. It had appeared in one internal diagnostic bulletin 3 years earlier, during a fault review that Hartwell Corporate had nearly buried under legal language and embarrassment. Vivian looked at Caleb again, more carefully this time. Then she stopped looking at Grant altogether. Caleb did not reach for the scan tool first. He reached for the flashlight. That told Vivian Hartwell more than the answer he had given her. Men who guessed trusted screens because screens made guessing look modern. Men who knew machines looked where the machine had been touched. Owen Hayes stood beside the driver door with the scan tool ready, careful now, waiting for instructions from the man Grant had tried to send out through the showroom. Caleb crouched beside the open door of the Apex X9 and looked under the lower dashboard panel without removing anything yet. The white service bay lights reflected off the polished paint, the marble showroom glowed beyond the glass wall, and on the other side of that glass Lucy stood holding Caleb's blue folder against her chest with the red toy wrench resting on top of it. Caleb saw her reflection for half a second in the SUV's door trim. Then he went back to work. Key on, engine running, he said. Owen looked to Vivian. Vivian nodded once. Owen started the sync test. The engine settled into its smooth idle, then dipped when the driver assist module began communicating with the rest of the system. The amber warning lights returned in their same order. Caleb held the flashlight steady under the dash. Back probe the shared return, he said. Owen connected the multimeter leads with the careful hands of someone who knew this moment would be remembered. The reading held for 1 second, then dropped just enough when the module synced. Not much. Enough. One of the older technicians leaned closer. There it is, he said under his breath. Grant stood near the tool cabinet with his arms folded, trying to make his silence look like supervision. Caleb did not look at him. Lower knee panel, Caleb said. 2 clips and 1 screw. Do not pull from the right side. Owen followed the instruction. Caleb guided him without taking over, because good diagnostics did not need to humiliate the person holding the tool. The panel came free cleanly. Caleb angled the flashlight behind the bracket and saw the harness pressed too tightly along the edge of a metal support, not cut, not destroyed, just routed wrong enough to make every vibration matter. A black connector sat under tension where it should have had slack. Caleb pointed with the end of the flashlight. There. Vivian stepped closer, careful not to crowd the work. Owen exhaled. That would explain the voltage drop. It explains the sequence, Caleb said. He loosened the retaining clip, eased the harness back along the correct route, seated the connector until it clicked, and checked the line with his thumb without forcing anything. His movements were slow, exact, almost quiet enough to make the watching room feel louder by comparison. Then he stood back. Run sync again. Owen did. The driver assist module initialized. The idle held steady. Stability stayed clear. Battery management stayed clear. The dashboard remained clean. No amber lights returned. For 3 seconds, the only sound in the service bay was the engine running the way a $180,000 vehicle was supposed to run. Smooth. Certain. Unembarrassed. Behind the glass wall, a salesman stopped mid-sentence with a customer. The receptionist at the front desk looked toward the service bay. Lucy lifted the red toy wrench slightly, not smiling yet, as if she was afraid to believe the room had finally seen what she already knew about her father. Vivian looked at the dashboard, then at Caleb, then at the open lower panel where the misrouted harness sat corrected under the light. How long was it under load before the warning came back, she asked. 2 seconds before, Caleb said. Now it will not come back unless someone routes it wrong again. Owen ran the test a third time because disbelief needed repetition. Still clear. The Apex X9 idled beneath the white lights without a tremor. Grant's arms lowered slowly to his sides. He had no line prepared for a silence this complete. Caleb wiped his hands with a shop towel, placed the flashlight on the cart, and stepped away from the vehicle as if he had only done what the problem required. He did not smile at Grant. He did not look around for approval. He looked through the glass at Lucy and raised 2 fingers, their small signal that meant it was okay. Lucy pressed the toy wrench to the glass. Vivian saw the gesture, then looked back at the blue folder in the little girl's arms. The folder Grant had not read. The room had read Caleb now. No one knew what to say. The clean dashboard did more than save the presentation. It removed the last place where Grant Pritchard could hide. For a few seconds, everyone in the service bay kept looking at the Apex X9 as if the warning lights might come back out of loyalty to the old order of the room. They did not. The engine idled smoothly beneath the white lights, soft and controlled, while the open lower panel exposed the simple truth behind the expensive confusion: one harness routed too tight, one connector under tension, one ground signal interrupted by a mistake small enough for pride to miss. Caleb Morrison placed the shop towel on the tool cart and stepped away from the vehicle. He did not stand beside it like a man claiming victory. He moved back toward the glass wall, toward Lucy, because that was where his life returned whenever the work was done. Vivian Hartwell watched him go, then turned to Owen Hayes. "Print the diagnostic log and photograph the harness routing before the panel goes back on," she said. Owen nodded quickly. Grant cleared his throat. "Ms. Hartwell, I should point out that the team had already narrowed the issue significantly before he stepped in." Vivian looked at him, not sharply, not angrily, just long enough for the sentence to fall apart by itself. "Did you?" Grant's mouth closed. Lucy came through the glass door when Caleb opened it for her. She handed him the blue folder with both hands, still holding the red toy wrench against her side. Vivian's eyes moved to the folder. "May I see that?" Caleb hesitated only a moment, then handed it over. She took it differently than Grant had. Not by the edge. Not with 2 fingers. She opened it with both hands and began to read. The first page was plain: employment application, work history, certifications, dates with gaps where life had interrupted everything a resume could explain. Then she reached the older documents Caleb had placed behind the application because part of him had still believed someone might read that far. A service bulletin summary. A diagnostic flow chart. A copy of an internal commendation from 3 years earlier. Vivian stopped breathing for half a second. Apex Electrical. Integration review, she said quietly. Caleb looked at the covered SUV, then back at her. "That was a long time ago. You wrote the routing note." Vivian looked up. The bulletin that kept the first Apex line from becoming a full recall. The older technician near the tool cart straightened. Owen looked at Caleb as if seeing him a second time. Grant's face tightened. "That document was internal," Vivian said. Caleb nodded once. I was on the diagnostic support team then. Why did you leave? The question was softer than her others, and because of that the room listened harder. Caleb looked down at Lucy. She had lowered the toy wrench and was staring at the folder in Vivian's hands as if it had become something alive. My wife, Hannah, got sick, he said. She used to schedule service at Eastbrook Auto. She knew every bay, every technician, every customer who needed patience before answers. When the treatment started, I stopped traveling. After she passed, Lucy needed school pickup, dinner, homework, and somebody awake in the morning. He touched the top of Lucy's shoulder. The industry moved on while I was doing that. No one corrected him. No one had the right. Vivian looked back at the application, at the certification dates Grant had used like a wall, at the work gaps that were not empty at all once a person knew what had filled them. She turned one page and found Hannah's old scheduling reference letter tucked behind Caleb's training history, its corners soft from being handled too many times. Vivian closed the folder slowly. This should have reached my desk, she said. Grant tried to answer. Based on our hiring criteria, I made a preliminary decision. Vivian looked at the Apex X9 idling cleanly behind him. You made a decision before the interview. The service bay went quiet again, but this silence was different from the one after the repair. That silence had belonged to the machine. This one belonged to the people. Vivian held Caleb's folder against her chest and looked at him with the kind of respect that arrived late enough to feel like an apology before it became one. Mr. Morrison, she said, I am sorry I am reading this after your work. Instead of before it. Caleb did not smile. He only picked up Lucy's toy wrench from where she had set it on the tool cart and placed it back in her hand. Most people stop at the gaps, he said. Vivian looked at Grant then, and for the first time that morning, he had no polished sentence ready. Vivian Hartwell did not offer Caleb Morrison the job in the service bay because the engine was running smoothly. She offered it because everyone in the building had seen exactly what it had taken for him to be allowed near the problem. The Apex X9 sat behind the glass wall with its dashboard clean, its idle steady, and its lower panel still open for Owen Hayes to document the corrected harness route. On the showroom side, customers had stopped pretending they were not watching. Salesmen stood beside polished vehicles with their hands folded too neatly. The receptionist had gone still behind the black front desk. Grant Pritchard remained near the tool cart, his tie straight, his shoes perfect, his authority suddenly looking like something that needed a floor underneath it and had just lost one. Vivian held Caleb's blue folder in both hands, the same folder Grant had placed on the counter like trash less than an hour earlier. Mr. Morrison, she said, and the room heard the respect in the name before they heard the words after it, I owe you an apology. Caleb stood with Lucy at his side, one hand resting lightly on her shoulder. He did not help Vivian make the apology smaller. He did not look at Grant. He waited. Vivian turned slightly so the service team and showroom staff could hear her clearly. You came here for an interview, and you were dismissed before anyone in this building bothered to understand what you knew. That should not have happened. Grant's face tightened. Vivian did not look at him yet. You saved this demo, and more than that, you exposed a hiring process that confused presentation with capability. Lucy looked up at Caleb, her red toy wrench pressed against her cardigan. Caleb's expression stayed quiet, but his thumb moved once against her shoulder, the small signal he used when emotions got too large for public places. Vivian opened the folder to the service bulletin again. Hartwell Premier Motors needs a lead diagnostic specialist. Not someday. Today. The position comes with senior pay, full benefits, and authority over complex electrical diagnostics across this location. The words moved through the showroom like light changing direction. Owen smiled before he could stop himself. The older technician looked down at the floor, not ashamed of Caleb, but ashamed of how easy it had been to let Grant decide who mattered. Caleb looked at the Apex X9, then at Lucy, then back at Vivian. I have conditions, he said. Grant made a small sound, but Vivian lifted one hand without turning toward him. The sound ended. "Tell me," she said. "I need a schedule that lets me handle school pickup unless there is a real emergency," Caleb said. "Not a showroom emergency. Not somebody's pride. A real one." Vivian nodded. "Agreed. Apprentices get trained by skill, not by who looks right in the lobby." Owen's face changed at that, and he stood a little straighter. "Agreed," Vivian said. Caleb held Lucy a little closer. "And applications do not get thrown out because grief left gaps where a perfect resume should be." That one stayed in the air longer. Vivian looked at the folder in her hands, then at Grant. "Agreed," she said. "Effective immediately, all service hiring decisions from this quarter will be reviewed by corporate operations. Mr. Pritchard, you will participate in that review from outside the interview process." Grant looked as if he wanted to object, but the Apex X9 idled behind him, steady and clean, answering before he could. Vivian placed the offer folder on the service counter. Lucy stepped forward and set her red toy wrench beside it, careful and solemn, as if the tiny plastic tool had earned a place there too. Caleb looked down at it, and for the first time that morning, something in his face softened. He signed only after reading every line. When he finished, he handed the pen back to Vivian and picked up the toy wrench for Lucy. Outside the glass, the showroom remained polished, expensive, and bright. But it no longer felt as if the marble floor belonged only to people with clean shoes. Caleb walked with Lucy toward the service bay door, not as a charity case, not as a man begging for a chance, but as the person the room had needed before it knew how to read him. Behind them, the Apex X9 kept running smoothly. No one at Hartwell Premier Motors called him unqualified again.